Thank you so much. So can you hear me, everyone? Oh, that's nice. It's a bit weird having you with the headphones. But maybe a more suitable title for this talk is actually the Chainsaw Manual, and hopefully you'll know by the end of this presentation why. But I like to start somewhere else. So on November 30th, 2022, ChatGPT became available for everyone. So this includes students, of course. And I'll tell you what happened. But before, let me just introduce myself. So my name is Sara Amandi. Come all the way from Denmark, Copenhagen. So quite a long ride to get here. Last time I participated in this conference was exactly 10 years ago. So I was here as a SAS student ambassador presenting my master thesis, and now I'm back 10 years later as the educator talking, talking about what I've learned since then. So my primary goal in life is to teach students how to navigate in the real world, so real life practice. And I do this as an external associate professor at the University of Copenhagen. And I teach a bunch of different courses. I teach statistics, programming, AI, time series analysis, and so far. But actually, this is just a hobby of mine. So I do this in my spare time. I have a full-time job on the side where I work at a Norwegian company called Læredal to create trust in data. And I do this, maybe just introduce what Læredal actually is. So Læredal started out as a toy manufacturer, but then quickly found out that they could use their expertise within dolls to create products to educate healthcare professionals. So we have, maybe you've seen the Anna doll, so you can practice CPR, right? And we also have birth simulators, so you can practice how to deliver a child, but also video games for nurses and conversational AI, so you can talk with the patients and so on. Our overall mission is to help save lives, so really proud of this. And I use my experience from working in a real company in the real world when I do this. So I teach at the university, and I like that I have the best of both worlds. I'm both a practitioner, so I know what we're doing out in the industry, and I also have the honor to try to pass this on to someone else. Okay, let's get back to the short video, not very important, just me, so that you can see I'm actually teaching. Back to the introduction of these AI tools in education. What happened when ChatGPT became available for everyone was that it was an entirely new element that was introduced for both students and educators. So it was very difficult to navigate and know how to handle this. And back then at the economics department at University of Copenhagen, where I work, we had a course called Programming and Statistics using SAS. So we had, until 2024, we had questions like, explain the following SAS code. And what happened when these tools became available was that students, of course, started using them, the tools, right? So AI, they copy-pasted the exam questions into an AI assistant, and then very quickly they could get really precise, very beautiful answers to those basic questions that we asked in the exams. So what we saw was that some students actually started writing recommendation on how to improve the code, even though they were only asked to comment it, right? They also started having a lot lesser spelling and grammar mistakes, so that was nice. But they also forgot to think. So a lot of students, they hadn't even read the question. It was very clear. They didn't even read what it was about. They hadn't even looked at the data that some of the questions was about, so they hadn't opened the data and seen what is actually in there. So what happened here was that it was like introducing this chainsaw to students on the first day of their semester. It is a very powerful tool, a chainsaw, and of course it's very nice to use instead of a regular axe or a saw or something like that, especially if you're a wood chopper. So let's stick with this analogy of the chainsaw being the new AI tools. The problem with the chainsaw is that it doesn't care whether it cuts through wood or a leg. So the danger of this chainsaw, it actually scales if we are unaware of how to use it. And if there are no manuals, no instructions on how to use these tools, it can be very difficult to know how to use it properly. And it requires a lot of expertise and knowledge. So if you don't have that, you start using the tools, you don't think, and it's very dangerous, at least for the people passing by in this case, and suddenly something can happen. I actually saw students using the tools like this, right? Yeah, just mentioning that it's dangerous and you should be careful. So what I did was that I started chopping down the old course, the old SAS programming course, and I would like to add a big disclaimer here, because I don't know if it was the right choice. I don't know if what I'm doing is actually working, but I knew that I had to do something because we couldn't continue as we did already. So I created this new course called Practical SAS and AI. And AI got a lot of students to sign up, so that was also very nice. But in the creation of the course, I had to balance, should we use AI or should we not use AI? Because the easy thing would be to just forbid AI, saying we do a closed book multiple choice exam, or we could also do an oral exam to make sure that students actually know what they're talking about. The problem with the oral exam is that sometimes I have up to 250 students taking one class, so it's very expensive. And I also really wanted to keep this format of a take-home exam where you sit and work with a project and you actually work like in the real world, right? Luckily, my boss isn't saying to me, you can't use AI, because it's a tool that we should learn how to use in our daily work. So I took a Python programming course at one point, and it was a multiple choice exam, and I was sitting and thinking, this is not how I work. This should be done differently, but it's difficult. So it hasn't been easy. I started laying the seeds for this new course to grow. So I wanted a more process-oriented course rather than this output-driven. So we shouldn't just think about the answer, write comments to this code. We wanted to follow the thoughts along the way of doing an exercise, a question. So I started out these lectures by introducing AI. And of course, I'm from Denmark, so I used Lego bricks to talk about this garbage in, garbage out principle. And it was very important to stress from the beginning that students had to remember to think critically. We spent a lot of time on talking about training data. So we talked about that these AI tools, they are created on data, on text that is generated by humans. So as it's trained by humans, the text also includes human biases like opinions, emotions, assumptions. And these tools can even amplify the human biases that lies in the training data. So understanding that training data can be biased was a very important task in this. Also, we talked about that in the SAS context, if you want to manipulate some data, we would often get a prog SQL response, because on the internet we have a lot of SQL queries showing how it can be done. But in a lot of cases, a data step might work just as fine. So that was also something we talked about. Then we discussed good prompting practices. So I had 3 students. I didn't film the students, so I filmed my kids instead. They were giving the same prompt, build a house. They had the exact same training data, and then we would expect that they would come out with some kind of the same output, right? But what happens is that because we have different types of large language models, they have different options and they're scaled in different ways, we also see that the output becomes really different. So understanding that there is a difference in how it happens is also very important. So this is just how it ended out. Same training data, same prompt, build a house, and you see the point. Very different output. A final thing, or not a final thing, but another thing we also discussed a lot was hallucinations. So this was what I saw at a student did last year in the exam. So this course has been running for 2 years. Now currently is the 2nd year. We had an exercise where they had to run some R code inside SAS. So of course, a way to do it is, I know that Python, we run Python like this. So let me tell me how to run R. And this was the response. So this is something that wasn't true, because I was here yesterday, and I, of course, saw that we're now introducing ProgR, which is exactly what is written here in this code. But this code is 1 year old, right? ProgR didn't exist back then, and we used ProgIML instead. So knowing that these hallucination is also part of the thing is very important. Oh yeah, ProgR, and I even just want to stress out that I tried it and the procedure is not found. It's still not available in the learning tools, so the students, if they get this response, they should still validate, right? They have to actually try things out and show that it works. They need some understanding. Yes, so let me see here. It was important for me from the beginning of the course to make the students aware of the limitations of AI. Because there are limitations when using these tools. We have to validate, we have to think critically when using them. But also the foundation. You need to understand at least some foundational SAS programming in order to actually use this. So having the domain skill, having some knowledge is critical. I had to present at a conference on mass spectrometry. I can't even say the word, mass spectrometry, which is analytical chemistry. And I said, of course I can do this. I can just use AI and I can present something. I don't know anything about mass spectrometry, so that ended up being a very bad presentation. So you need to know what you're talking about, because I couldn't even validate if the first output where I wrote what is mass spectrometry, I didn't know if it was true or not. So the domain knowledge is important, and that's also why we have spent a lot of time on teaching in the old-fashioned way. So going through coding concepts, this is a loop, this is different variable types, this is an array, and so on. Also trying to make it a bit cross-code language, compare with Python or different languages that they actually know. We actually also even started very basic, so saying, what is data? What is a variable? What is an observation? So that they could start seeing the data in front of them, and when they start manipulate, they actually know what they're doing. So this foundation was important. We also did exercises on how to use AI in cooperation with practice and writing even better code. So we had this exercise. This is the exact same code, just with different variable names and different data set names. So I asked the students, you can read this afterwards, but it was an exercise where I asked the students to write a prompt. So please help correct and add comments to this code. And then they had to insert the 2 code snippets that you saw before. In the first example, we had a response from the AI. So this is Le Chat, the French chat that is responding here. It commented the code, and it was very great and said that it added comments and the calculation is correct as written here. And we have a data step that is with a run. So we did the same with the other code. And what happened here was quite interesting, because here it says the corrected and commented code. The formula is incorrect. The correct formula is this one. So what it knows here is that because we have given the context, we have written the variable names, we have written a data set name that makes sense, it can actually help us. So with the appropriate amount of context, with good programming practices, writing your code in a good way, you get a lot better results than without. So this is both for you tomorrow when you can't remember what you did. It's for your coworkers, but it's definitely also for the AIs. So building this coding foundation has actually been a lot harder than I thought, because the students have all the answers out there, and it's very difficult to teach them how to ask the right questions. So the main point was remember to think critically. And I tried to do that by actually increasing the exam hours. So before it was 3.5 hours, now we increased to 6 hours, because I wanted the students to spend time on describing their process. I want them to take me into their thoughts that they go through when doing these exercises. We don't have describe this code exercises anymore. It's more project-oriented. You have this data. How do you make it work in a way so that you can do something? This is just an example I provided for the students, saying that I need you to document your interaction with AI throughout the way. So I told the students this is just one way to do it, but you can do it in any way that you want. The important thing is that you think while doing these exercises. So this was, directly contributes and some examples here. If you're more interested, then let's talk afterwards about what we else did. We really spend a lot of time, or I spend a lot of time on telling the students what was expected from them. Because having clear expectations, knowing what they actually need to know from this course is important. And then I also told the student that this is not something I can do on my own. This is a collaboration between me and the students, because I don't know how they work. When I studied a few years, okay, maybe a bit more than a few years ago, I didn't have these tools. So I don't know how they work with it. And I need to have their feedback in order to do this in the right way. It's also about trust, because no matter how I create these exercises, these exams, it would be possible to use AI and say, just create something. So I need their trust, or I need to trust them as well, so that we can create something that makes sense. It is a collaboration. On a higher level, just want to be a bit philosophical here in the end. We know that physical strength has been humanity's advantage for many decades, or centuries at least. But then the Industrial Revolution came, and what happened was that machines automated muscles, and our force or strength as humans became intellectual strength. So we had the power to think, and that became our edge. But now we built something that can actually think for us. So what are we actually educating for? That is my question. And my answer is not autopilot. So the students who succeed, they aren't the ones who use AI tools, generative AI, without knowing what they're doing, just looking out the window and thinking that autopilot will do everything for them. It is the students who know that it's called co-pilot, not autopilot. So you really have to understand how the instruments are working, what they're telling you, and when you should override. When should you act? So if we forget to think, that is when we lose the entire purpose of education, in my opinion. And creating this domain knowledge is very important. Last, in the end, we're at this forest. There are two roads going through the forest for students, for us as practitioners as well. We can go the easy route. We can just have AI do stuff for us without us needing to think, just having all the answers, not really understanding the question that we ask. But we can also choose the other way. So it's a bit more bumpy. We have to stop along the way. We have to think. We have to question. We have to know what we're doing. We have to understand the limitations, because if we don't understand the limitation and go the easy route, it will lead to workforces that are passive to algorithmic biases, and they evaluate misinformation. So my final note here is that if you, as an employer, have to hire someone, the last question that or the question that you can ask students at an interview is why. So you have done all of this, you created this, that's nice, but why? You thought along the way. And that is also what differentiates two paths that you can take here. And the forest is the same, but the destination isn't.
All right, thank you so much, Sarah. We have time for a few questions, if there's any questions from the audience for Sarah.
Check. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. That was great. I have a question about, so I know you mentioned in learning and in academia, you have to focus on the foundation. It's something I kind of relate to it. When I was in college and in school, there was closed textbook exams and there's no reviewing notes. And then we transitioned that to open textbook exams. And then now you can use the internet and use citations.
I think it's very it's very important to mention that at the economics department where I work, there are almost every course is closed book exams with oral exams. So it needs to be, there needs to be both, because without the closed book and without the oral exams, you could just use the tools and not learn anything. So we need both, but I think it's very important that we also teach using AI, because if you enter the job market not knowing what it is, then you're behind.
Great presentation. And as a fellow educator, you really nailed, I think, where a lot of us are struggling to integrate this in. My question is, how have students responded to this course? In particular, engaging in with that process of critical thinking, and then maybe also too, if you could comment on how some of your colleagues are within this space as well, and maybe some resources or support they've given you.
Thank you. Great question. The students, they're very happy, at least the ones I talk with. So they like that they can actually learn something that they can use in the real world. Because it's an economics education that we're on, so you have a lot of macroeconomics, microeconomics that it's very difficult to see where do I actually need this when I go out and have a real job. So having this focus on actually showing them what I do in my job, in my daily job. I show them, okay, this was the project I did last week. I used Cloud Code and I did it like this. But of course, I had this problem, so I had to think what is happening here. So they really like this format, I have found. With fellow practitioners, it's very much a mix, because there are some who really think that the fundament is the most important thing. And it is, because if you don't have this domain knowledge, you can't continue and build on that. So some are very, they're not angry, but they think it's a weird approach I have taken. So mixed.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for coming on stage and doing the presentation. My name is Abhishek Kumar. I'm an MBA student. I'm studying business analytics. What you mentioned about autopilot, it's not autopilot, it's co-pilot, because you're collaborating, right? So I love that point. So recently I read an article where it's like, there's one country, I forgot the name, but they're kind of going backwards. So like instead of using AI and stuff like that, they are going back to like textbooks. So they're printing more textbooks, just more physical, instead of using AI to do it. And it's kind of opposite of what you talked about, right? In the next 5 years, they're going to be printing more textbooks, and students will be like required to read textbooks instead of just using AI. And so I just want to know your thought about that. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's very important. So my husband is a high school teacher, and he has also turned into notebooks and pens, because students, especially in high school, they can't navigate in this. And it's difficult for me, because creating this presentation, I that I had Copilot and ChatGPT and whatever who could just create this this presentation for me. It's difficult for us as humans to go the difficult route of thinking and not using the AI tools without. Yeah, we want everything to be easy. So I think it's important. I think we need the textbooks. We need the pen and paper as well. But we also need to educate in what these tools can do, because they are out there. They will not disappear. If they do, I don't know what I will do, because all of my work is now built on these tools. So, yeah, that's my thoughts.
Hi, I'm Ken. I'm with my colleague here, Regina, from NYU. We are currently embracing the idea that AI has come to stay. More jobs are requiring the skill to know how to prompt and use AI very well. So our approach and philosophy to it is to teach the students the fundamentals and also AI. Now, my question to you is this. Have you considered the idea of, okay, students, you can use the AI template that you just showed us, but we want you to also be able to verify the output, because it's still a probabilistic model, and that becomes a skill, because you mentioned hallucination. It's a probabilistic model. We know there's always a chance, even if it's so minimal, that it could generate the wrong thing, right? So have you tried playing with the idea of whatever you generate, don't take it as face value. Part of the critical thinking is find sources that back it up, argue for or against it, and that becomes an additional exercise.
Yes, we have done that already. So we have these refute problems, we call them, where we try to make a mistake on purpose, and then the student should try to explain it without running the code in an AI, and then explain what went wrong and why. So definitely, and I could have an entire lecture on refute problems. I did that a couple of weeks ago, so that would be my next presentation. You can just stay and then.
All right, well, thank you everyone so much for attending our session, and thank you, Sarah, our presenter. That's all the time we have for today.